Thanks for joining us. If you're here for the Sustainable Phosphorus webinar series on Enhanced Efficiency Phosphate Fertilizers, you're in the right place. If you have any questions at any time during the presentations today, you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. You don't have to wait until the end of the talk, so you can input those questions at any point and we'll capture those. And then and just a little bit about who we are at the Sustainable Phosphorus Alliance. We work across North America, and we're the central forum and advocate for the sustainable use, recovery, and recycling of phosphorus in the food system. We're supported by a large number of member organizations, and we'd like to thank them for helping to support this webinar series and other activities that we do. If you'd like to become a member of the Phosphorus Alliance, please reach out to us at phosphorusalliance.org. And we can start that discussion. We only have memberships for organizations, not for individuals, but there are other ways that individuals can get involved. Excuse me, and you can find more out about that at the website as well. This webinar will be posted in about a week on our YouTube channel. We have over 50 hours of video content on that channel that you can access. That's at youtube.com/Sustainable Phosphorus Alliance. Lots of information there, not just from this webinar series, but from some of our other events as well. Also, I'd like to invite everyone to join us in person this February 21st and 22nd for our annual Phosphorus Forum event. This will take place in the Phoenix metro area. It'll be a 2-day event, and we'll have lots of great speakers and other activities for you there. We'll have a website up about this soon. Probably registration will open, I'm guessing, in August. So keep an eye out. If you're a subscriber to our newsletter, which you can become at our website, or if you follow us on social media, you can find out, you can keep track of when that registration site opens. Okay, so in terms of today's webinar, just by way of background, investment in research and development for innovative fertilizers has historically been quite low, but there are really mounting pressures to improve fertilizer performance and address issues such as food insecurity, environmental pollution, and resource conservation. And there are a number of technologies that have been explored for developing new phosphate fertilizers, and these include things like slow release technologies, phosphate fixation blockers, plant biochemical response inducers, and others. After the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, there were big food and fertilizer disruptions, and after that, efforts really ramped up to incentivize the development of new fertilizers, especially nitrogen fertilizers, but also phosphates. The Global Fertilizer Challenge, for example, has raised more than $135 million from US, EU, Norwegian government partners and other private partners towards this effort. And efforts in the US also include things like the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research's Efficient Fertilizer Consortium and the joint USDA EPA Next Generation Fertilizer Challenges, including the topic of today's webinar, the Enhanced Efficiency Fertilizer Challenge. So today we're going to hear from EPA about their challenge. And we're going to hear from a few of the participants in the challenge about their enhanced efficiency phosphate fertilizer technologies. So we're joined by a few presenters today, and I'll introduce them as they come up. But our first one today is Dr. Britta Bierwagen. She's from EPA, and she's an associate division director there.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for participating today. This is very exciting for us. I am actually standing in for another EPA employee, Christopher Clark, whose brainchild this really is. And I have worked with him on this for the last several years. I think we started this project maybe with a kickoff of what is it that we can do kind of in this space, really thinking about nutrient reductions, kind of writ large. And so I think that was about 2018 when we had that first sort of kickoff meeting. And since then, we have done quite a bit of work with a whole host of partners, some of whom you'll hear from today. And the whole reason we really wanted to embark on this is obviously from the perspective of the Environmental Protection Agency. Excess nutrients are an issue that we are interested in and interested in reducing, whether it's from a water quality point of view, and these graphs show nitrogen and phosphorus contributions to the Gulf of Mexico. But there are also climate change and air quality concerns. And while we've made quite a bit of progress, particularly from voluntary programs in reducing excess nutrients from agriculture, there still are these remaining issues and remaining excesses. So about 5 or so years ago is when we started these conversations about, what else could be done? Are there big new ideas out there? And, we knew that there are some improved fertilizer technologies that exist that could potentially be used, that were very innovative, that still would perform well under a range of conditions, but that there are barriers to that adoption. And so what we did is we partnered with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to really think broadly about this problem, and decided on using the challenges format for this. And so we came up with the Next Gen Fertilizer Challenge. We also heavily relied on the Fertilizer Institute and the National Corn Growers Association and the Nature Conservancy in really shaping what these challenges would be, and then partnered with the International Fertilizer Development Center as well for further phases of the project that I'll talk about. So as we put together this partnership, what we really wanted to focus on is, are there cost-effective ways to really develop these novel fertilizer technologies? What is effective for farmers to, maintain profitability and productivity? How can we do this at large row crop production scales? So, if we start with corn, what would we be able to do? We wanted to improve environmental performance, so reduce nutrient losses in this case, and then really also not leave any toxic residue in the environment. So with that, we decided on 2 challenges. One of them on really looking at existing enhanced efficiency fertilizer. So that was the first environmental agronomic challenge. And we, you will hear from 3 of our winners today on their technologies. And then we had another one that was a Next Gen Fertilizer Innovations Challenge that really focuses on the novel technologies. So what we did here was opened both challenges in August of 2020. 40 solutions were selected for the existing challenge and 76 for the Next Gen challenge. We recommended, or not we, a panel of experts outside of our set of partners and steering committee recommended 16 for advancement to these greenhouse trials with IFDC. Those began in 2021 and will have final results this summer. And then we had this Next Gen challenge where 9 were selected as winners and received cash prizes. We had a showcasing event that was fabulous with all of those who advanced from the first challenge and the winners of the second challenge. We had our partners at IFDC post those videos, and hopefully you'll be able to use that link as well. And then we have some next steps on hopefully field trials for these very exciting technologies that, we'll have a few, hopefully, moving on from those greenhouse trials to actually something in the field in 2024. So with that, these are the whole set of companies that were advancing from that first challenge. And you can see on the right, we have the key of what the kind of the technological approach is from each of these. And then in that third column, you can see what the main nutrient or nutrients are that it's focusing on, whether it's just nitrogen or just phosphorus or both nitrogen and phosphorus. And then today we will hear from 3 of our winners, or advancers, I should say, who will discuss their technologies in more detail. So this is really exciting, and we are just so happy that it's advancing from through the greenhouse trials and then hopefully on to field trials as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you all, and we'll start in on our challenge advancers.
Great, thanks so much, Britta. Our next presenter is Chuck Anderson, and he's the VP and General Manager of Specialty Liquids at the Andersons. And Chuck, are you able to take control and lead us in through your discussion?
Yeah, you should be seeing my slides now.
Yep,
no?
Great.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the phosphorus nutrition program, our paradigm. So in row crop agriculture, you really have 2 extremes in phosphorus nutrition, pre and post the Green Revolution. Before the Green Revolution, you had wide usage of rock phosphate, which is essentially mined rock. And it had low water solubility, low plant availability, but it wasn't prone to tie up in the soil. After the Green Revolution, you had wide usage of soluble phosphorus, which was acidulated typically with sulfur. Made it very soluble and very plant available, but it was also prone to tie up in the soil with metals like aluminum, calcium, and iron. And you also had nutrient losses with this paradigm change. So the question is, why does it need to be either or? So if you combine, rather than a soluble form, potentially combining with other metals in the soil, why not combine with a metal of our choice? So our proposal is a slow release phosphorus, which is magnesium ammonium phosphate, or otherwise known as struvite. It's not highly soluble in water. Being that it's combined with ammonium and magnesium, it makes it relatively not prone to tie up in the soil. So we're going to look at the phosphorus cycle, and I'm not here to explain this, but I know enough that this is extremely complicated. But one thing that I don't like about this depiction, and again, any image that's in here that is not from the Andersons, the credits are at the bottom of the image. But what it doesn't depict here is that the plant is basically shown as a passive participant. So I like this a little bit better because it shows that the plant roots are active in this equation, basically exuding weak acids into the soil media to basically take in plant nutrients, including phosphorus. And so this magnesium ammonium phosphate, or struvite, is available to a weak acid to be taken up by the plant. So that hypothetically eliminates all of the interaction with all the other soil metals that can basically complicate the soil equation, soil phosphorus equation. So struvite is highly plant available. It has very low water solubility, and it's very safe in seedlings. And I've actually seen seedlings grow in straight struvite. Struvite formation is actually is a naturally occurring chemical compound. That's taken from your source there. But if you have an aqueous solution with containing a lot of phosphorus and ammonia and soluble magnesium, you will crystallize struvite. And so here's some of the natural forms: kidney stones in a dog in this particular case. I did do some research, and it's not the most common kidney stone, but it does also form in humans. Canned tuna. I've looked at message boards where people think this is glass in their canned tuna. And then wastewater treatment plants typically will have this problem of struvite building up in their pipes. There is purposeful harvesting of struvite in wastewater treatment facilities or other areas where you have soluble phosphorus in a water solution. Wastewater treatment locations are the most common. There's 3 companies within North America that are currently harvesting struvite at wastewater treatment plants. Now I'd like to turn the attention to how the Andersons plays a role with struvite with DG technology. The DG, or dispersible granules, are a combination of organic water-soluble binders complexed with insoluble microparticles. These granules are easy to store, transport, and apply, but undergo a phase change after application when contacted with liquid water, yielding millions of subparticles that intermix into the soil media. So our experience, how did we get into this at the Andersons? So the Andersons has been investing in DG technology for 30 years and markets dozens of products worldwide for application to golf greens where the dispersible feature limits undesirable granules remaining on the turf surface. And a typical golf green will have a height of 1/10 of an inch. So there's nowhere for a granule to hide. So it really needs to essentially disperse into the soil media. And our Contact DG products will disperse within 10 minutes of irrigation. We also market DG soil amendments into the homeowner and agricultural markets, and just recently purchased a facility in Langsburg, Michigan, bringing the total DG facilities to 5 within the Andersons. We began researching struvite in the DG form in 2008 and launched SmartPhos DG into golf shortly thereafter. This is a picture of 3 raw forms of struvite to the left from 3 different wastewater treatment plants and the DG granule to the right. One advantage is it does make a nice uniform granule that can be mixed with other ingredients. From 2008 to 2012, we performed many studies with Ohio State, and this one measured DG granules dispersing through mulch, dark mulch, over a 30-minute period with measured irrigation. So basically, they set up a camera and digitally captured an image every 15 seconds over 20 minutes. In this particular case, within 30 minutes, all those granules were essentially mixed into the soil media. Now, I will say in this particular case, this was not struvite. Struvite is a little bit slower in its dispersion, but it shows that this insoluble material would be dispersed into the soil media. And then we did some other studies also with Ohio State. This actually came with the Ohio Department of Development grant. And we found a higher efficiency with insoluble fertilizers and soil amendments, presumably due to the higher surface area of the insoluble microparticles. This study at Ohio State, we planted corn with monoammonium phosphate, or MAP, struvite and also DG struvite. No other nutrients were in this study, and this was just planted in sand. So you're talking about the worst case scenario, and found better efficiency and less plant damage to the struvite DG. Again, we tried it again with container grown nursery stock. This was also just raw struvite versus a dispersible form of struvite. Again, it showed significant better growth with the DG version. We then went to ag. In this particular case, we took the best situation in putting struvite in a strip till. So strip till, you're gonna drill the fertilizer in 4 to 6 inches down. In this particular study, we pressed the limit, so we applied struvite at half the rate of the monoammonium phosphate. And this was applied in the fall before the crop was put in the spring. So in this particular case, the farmer alternated rows between half rate of struvite, DG, and a full rate of MAP. And this was his original trial. And we essentially got equal results or equal yield with this 1-year study. Now, we did no environmental fate in this study, but it was our first foray into the ag. We repeated the study in 2016-17, much bigger area. In this particular case, the MAP area is 47 acres and 64 acres with the struvite DG. What was different in this study, although the yields were essentially the same again, is we did our soil sampling in the rows. So you're putting all your phosphorus in the rows where the corn was planted. What was interesting is that the soil test phosphorus was much higher than the MAP, even though it was applied at half the rate. And that was during the crop season and post-harvest. And then the phosphorus level of the tissue testing was essentially the same during that study. So that's fine. How about the efficiency, was looking pretty much equal at half the rate everywhere we tested. And we wanted to test environmental fate. This work was done at Ohio State, again, under Libby Dayton, Dr. Libby Dayton at Ohio State. And in this particular case, she was testing 4 forms of nutrition, MAP and DAP, so diammonium and monoammonium phosphate. Those are the 2 quadrants at the top. And then bottom left is struvite DG, and then bottom right is raw struvite. In this particular case, the MAP and DAP yielded, and that's the white circles there, about 2,000 ppm through the media in the first day, where DG struvite was 40 ppm. And then the raw struvite was actually much less. And then we repeated the study again in 2021, again, this time, again with Libby Dayton. But this was a much more extensive study where we did a sandy soil and a clay soil, and also did a high organic matter soil and a loam soil. And in each case, the open circles or the white circles is the MAP percent, the amount of cumulative release of phosphorus. They also tested magnesium and ammonia or nitrogen, and those also were in the slow release form, and got acceptable or great results, meaning they did not transport readily in either of any of the 4 samples or soil types during the study. And so our motivation at the Andersons is obvious. In 2014, Lake Erie water crisis hit Toledo. And not only is the Andersons corporate offices in that watershed, but thousands of farmers, neighbors, employees, and my wife and I rely on this area. And we need solutions to protect our food supply, water, and our environment. So in 2024, we are planning a 4-year study in cooperation with H2 Ohio and Ohio State under the direction of Dr. Vinayak Shadekar to further understand struvite DG efficiency and its impact on the environment. So this is something that we have been looking to do for many years, because we recognize that single year studies just are not enough. This is going to be a multi-year study, and each treatment will stay in the same location for 4 straight years. The top plots will be in Defiance, Ohio, and those little yellow circles is where we will be taking water samples daily from the tile and also surface. And then the bottom plots will be replicated trials, agronomic. The top area, by the way, is about 15 acres. In the bottom area, that's an agronomic study with a cooperative farmer. About 80 acres replicated trials. So that's essentially our dream, is to get the data to really determine whether this is a game changer with our agricultural footprint. So with that, I will pass it back to Matt.
Great, thanks so much, Chuck. And it's great to hear that you're working with Vinayak Shetikar as well. He was a member of our phosphorus transport modeling group, and great guy and great researcher. So we have a few questions that have come up during the chat. I think actually the first one is more of a question for Britta than it is for you, Chuck. And then the next two, I think, are for you. I'm going to just go ahead and read off the first question here, which is, are the winning companies, and this is for you, Britta, are the winning companies for the Enhanced Efficiency Fertilizer Challenge and the Next Gen Fertilizer Challenge, are they all from the US, or are they from countries worldwide?
So for the Next Gen Fertilizer Challenge, that were the ones that weren't on the market yet. Those were, yes, worldwide, but needed to have a US presence in order to be eligible for any of the monetary awards. So those are just kind of the rules from the US based challenges. But it really was, I mean, we got submissions internationally. So that was great.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. The next question we have is from my friend Robin Skeets up there in Canada. Robin asks, how do you manage, and this is for you, Chuck.
Yes.
How do you manage the composition of struvite to create custom blending for row crop and specialty horticulture applications when nutrient management and precision ag practices demand a balanced nutrient application?
Yeah, really good question. And so I showed the picture of that application, the strip till machine, and that in that particular case, he had multiple bins in that application equipment and did apply all the nutrients separately. So struvite was put in a separate bin. So that leads right into the precision ag question, because he was able to do variable rate applications there. And then as it relates to, custom blending for other nutrients, when we do our granulation, we granulate to the particle size that matches other nutrients. So it can be blended with urea and potash and micronutrients fairly easily.
Okay, great. And it looks like we're getting the questions up on the slide now. So another question here for you, Chuck, was how was the undissolved struvite accounted for in your strip placement experiments? Yes.
So this is, I'm going to answer this like I really know what I'm talking about. So here's what. So as you notice, the P results were much higher with the struvite plots. This is the only data that we have. So when that soil test was done, if you noticed in the data, it was both Bray 1 and Bray 2 testing, and those simply, as I understand, just use a different strength of acid to extract the phosphorus from the soil sample. And so essentially what it presumably would basically dissolve all of the struvite from the soil sample, or certainly a vast majority of it. So the purpose of that soil sample that is dissolving it with a weak acid is it's basically trying to give you an idea of what would be available to the plant, which also has a weak acid that it can dissolve nutrients and make them available to the plant. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, great. If it doesn't, Andrew, please let us know. We can follow up with another question here. We have another question, which is, what is the fate of magnesium, and does it change the acidity of the soil?
So the magnesium was also checked in that. And by the way, this study, the last study that we did in 2021, is a pretty extensive write-up that Libby did, Dr. Dayton, I'm sorry. And that I will make available to anyone who requests. And hopefully they can get my email address, Matt. But happy to share that test. And quite frankly, they tested magnesium and nitrogen in that study and essentially proved out that it was essentially slow release as well. So when the struvite is basically becoming available, it's releasing the magnesium, nitrogen, and phosphorus basically at the same time. So, magnesium is a big, metal within the soil already, and it's an essential plant nutrient. How it affects the acidity, unknown.
Okay. Next question here is the solubility of struvite without DG treatment the same as with the DG treatment on the field? There's a comment here that it would seem that the behavior of the 3 batches shown in the picture would differ from the behavior of the DG batch shown on the extreme right.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work around this, and the other chemical that we have done a lot of work with on DG is methylene urea, which is a slow release nitrogen. But we essentially what we find is the behavior of the chemical is not changed. But what does change is you massively change the surface area. So the solubility is not changing, but because the surface area is so much greater, then you're exposing that chemical to so much more in the soil environment, and it's going to be available much quicker than say a big chunk of that same struvite, which has a very limited surface area.
Great. And our last question before we move on to our next talk. Can phosphorite be processed to produce struvite? Is that efficient?
So that is out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah. So from the chemical standpoint, there's a lot of companies that are in this space. I'd already mentioned them on my slides, and they're much. Our thing at the Andersons is about the formulation, focusing on the formulation. So that's what we're continuing to research on. And as it relates to the synthetic processing of chemicals to make struvite, I know there's companies out there doing it. Ostera is doing that today, synthetically producing struvite. And I don't know all the chemistry involved in doing that.
Okay, great. Thanks again, Chuck, for putting together that presentation and answering those questions. We're going to move on to our next presentation. And the next person up is Alex Duffy. He's the National Product Manager for Timac Agro US. And Alex, are you able to take control here?
Thanks, Matt. I think I got it.
Okay, great. We see you.
Very good. Hello, everyone. Thanks for putting this together, Matt. I really appreciate it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about 2 of our technologies that we submitted for evaluation through the EEF competition, Duomex and TopPhos. They both use similar base materials, just in very different processes through. And I think to start this out, it's really important to kind of go over a little bit, for those of you guys that aren't familiar with Timac Agro, kind of what we do and what we're about, because that's really rooted in how this technology was developed. So we really like to take natural ingredients and use them to make the common fertilizers more efficient. So what this actually means is, that as we start to go into the products, we really like to use naturally available materials and incorporate them in to kind of boost the efficiency of common materials. And so the first one that we submitted is a product called Duomax. It's a fertilizer additive, so it's got a lot of flexibility around applications because most fertilizer plants within the US have some sort of application equipment in their fertilizer blend towers, specifically most of the time used for things like nitrogen stabilizer technology. But we really wanted to bring our product and give some flexibility and use on the phosphorus end of the spectrum as well. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement in how we think about this. So that product has 3 really major components. Again, all of them are kind of rooted in existing natural compounds. They were actually developed by one of our lead scientists, Dr. Jose Garcia Mena, who is president of the Humic Trade Association. So you're going to notice a common large carbon molecule thread and theme throughout this. And that is basically the technology behind what we call the MPPA carbon complex, which is basically a patented process of solubilizing really large chain carbon molecules and then incorporating them into the fertilizer. The other is what we call our Duo or XCK1750. It's a microbial activator. It's a high auxin precursor that actually helps the plant to build roots and signal rooting development. And the last is, and not super important for this context, but we also incorporated a nitrogen loss complex in that product as well. Now for Top Phos, we actually took a lot of that base work that we did with Duomax and incorporated that into the granulation process. So worldwide, Timac Agro owns 16 granulation plants, and we do about 2.5 million tons a year in granular production. We actually recently acquired a granulation plant in Georgia as well. And so we're really used to, and we've developed this. Top Phos globally has been on the market for a good bit. And what that is it's taking that large carbon complex and incorporating that into the phosphorus process. So it actually, we call it Top Phos, but the technical term would be organic complexed superphosphate. And we'll go into a little bit more about what that means. But basically, it can be combined relatively easy in a manufacturing process and then either blended in a fertilizer blending system and used as like the soil phosphorus source, or we can actually make finished homogeneous granular materials that are higher efficiency and take advantage of utilizing those humic molecules. So when I say that, what do I actually mean? What do I actually mean? And this is, the patented combination of our materials, which I kind of covered in the last slide, and kind of how they work to improve the plant and, benefit from both the microbial activator side and the soil microbes, which mediate a lot of phosphorus availability within the soil, to nutrient holding capacity and preventing things like tie up in, high and low pH soils, whether that's, iron or calcium. So this is all rooted in what we call our MPPA molecule, our large carbon complex. So this is a high stable molecular weight carbon material. And it's basically through our extraction process, what we do is we remove all the existing metal on the binding sites and basically expose them to be able to use and take up the ions that are within that fertilizer that you're treating it with. So again, this makes it really flexible from an application standpoint from an end user, and it also can be used both to treat liquid as well as granular materials. So that activation process requires removing the metal on the binding sites and exposing them, and then essentially solubilizing difficult to solubilize large molecular weight carbon molecules. And this is kind of a picture of one so that you can kind of get a visual identity around what they look like. So what this actually means is when you treat Duomax on a granular, in this case, this was a triple superphosphate treated, what it provides is a more stable release of soluble phosphorus within the soil systems. So, and that process is involving hydrogen bonds, and basically those humic binding sites allow in carboxylic acid groups allow for a more controlled and a more steady release. It doesn't take as long for it to become available, and you don't risk as much of it being tied up within the soil. And so this really creates like what we call a like phosphate metal humate complex that, you know, modifies the solubility of that phosphorus and keeps it plant available longer. And this has major impacts. When we were writing the EEF grant, I put some requests from our research and development facility in France to run some environmental studies for us. And this has big implications. And we've actually seen this in the field as well as we maintain and hold more phosphorus within the soil, we see it in the plants. And that's really the goal, right? When a farmer makes an investment in a phosphate, which is already in and of itself, say DAP, inefficient, it's a lot of investment for not a lot of net return. And then you also lose it to the environment, as Chuck said before. So what we did is in the middle there, we did the runoff tests, our P-loss to runoff tests there. And you can see that because we are combining it with that humic molecule, we are actually changing the chemistry and keeping it and maintaining it in that root zone and preventing it from running off a lot easier. And this had other implications too, as you can see, for nitrogen loss. Our Duo XCK 1750 is a microbial activator. It's a precision microalgae extract. It's high auxin, and it's specifically isolated to enhance the colonization of rhizobacteria and mycorrhizal fungi within the plant. So we really wanted to take a two-prong approach when we looked at this product, in that we want to keep that phosphorus available longer, and we want to allow the plants and help the plants to uptake it better. And most phosphorus availability is mediated by the microbiology. So in this test, you can actually see we did gene abundance studies with it, and we had DAP and DAP treated with Duomax. And basically what this is quantifying is the number of replications. So you can actually make a marker for mitochondrial RNA that can basically quantify how many bacteria and how many mycorrhizal fungi and what your populations actually look like. And what we're showing here is that when you treat the DAP with Duomax, we're seeing greater gene abundance from both those markers of mycorrhizal fungi and rhizobacteria. And what this means for the plant is that the plants grow bigger roots and have more access to nutrients, the happier the microbes are in the soil. So this has larger implications for how that plant is actually interacting with that fertilizer that we're putting down. And what this really means in practical terms is that you see here we did a 7-17-3 with micros and a corn starter, and we treated it with Duomax. And you can see there that we have finer root hairs and larger. And then we followed up with tissue tests, and you can see that basically because we have bigger roots and a stronger root development system, that leads to greater nutrient uptake across the board and across all of your macros and micronutrients that we tested. So I put this piano chart together. Actually, my coworker, Michael Piscata, put this piano chart together, and he did a really good job with it. We've done about 94 sites, most of them in the last 3 years. This is all replicated either research or contract research organization on an array of crops, from corn to potatoes to soybeans to wheat to sugar beets to sweet potatoes to rice. So we put this out on a large amount of different production systems, as well as with different base fertilizer materials such as MAP or single or triple superphosphate, or liquids, like I said, liquid starter fertilizer like 1034O, or like a 721-3 like I had presented before. And what we generally see is we see about a 5.8% increase in yield utilizing that, and about a 92.5% success rate across all of our trials. So next we're going to jump into top phos. Top phos is actually one of, I think, the is one of the most widely used and known products globally that doesn't have a really strong presence here in the US, but I think there is a lot of market potential for this. And this is our organically complexed superphosphate. And you can see here, this is our patent application on the process around how we complex those humic acids and form our phosphate, calcium, humic complex. And what this does is it helps to maintain that phosphorus availability and keep that phosphorus more plant available and preventing it from tie up in, say, high pH soils where you see a lot of times, say, calcium, or in low pH soils where iron tends to be your big chelator there. And that basically, those two forms, once they get into them in low and high pH scenarios, they basically no longer, and they're not nearly as efficient in being able to be uptaken by the plant. We've done numerous scientific publications around how we developed this product, and you can see there is a common name on most of these. It's Dr. Jose Garcia Mina. He is the primary on the patent, as well as a lot of his grad students there did a lot of the work. And he's done a lot of works on how to study the physiochemical properties of a phosphate metal humic substance, as well as how to stabilize and how stable they are within the structures. He's also done a fair bit of work on how the humate phosphate complexes interact with the plant itself. And we've done a lot of R&D work showing that it has secondary benefits like increased root development, increased plant health, and being able to utilize these phosphorus materials at lower rates, which we'll see in some of the studies that I have coming. Being able to utilize these phosphorus materials at a lower rate, pound per acre, and still maintain our yields. So this is a little characterization of how these changes actually occur with monocalcium phosphate versus top phos type material over the course of time. And so you can see how the top phos actually maintains that phosphorus availability in acidic soils. So on the left-hand side there, you can see that, we're at 10, 20, and 30 days after application, and we maintain much more available phosphate throughout that time with the interaction, or with the humic complex as compared to a standard monocalcium phos. Changes in phosphorus in calcareous soils, like I said earlier, in calcareous soils, phosphorus likes to tie up with calcium, and you can see there that we maintain much more phosphorus in the plant available form, and you're seeing a lot more, especially in those early 10 and 20 day scenarios, almost double what's available in the standard. And this is Dr. Jose Garcia Mina's work. It's published University of Navarra in Spain. Top phos is not only a protected phosphorus, but it also has, like I said, a lot of biological effects in rooting. And we can see that you end up stimulating the activity of the soil biology with that more available form of phosphorus, and this leads to more root growth and a lot more synthesis of auxins within the plant, which leads to a stronger root system. Sometimes when you apply too much phosphorus early within a plant, you actually end up kind of getting lazy roots, we call them. This almost acts in the opposite way, where it signals the plant to keep growing roots and keep uptaking nutrients as well as water. And you can see here in our lab studies that you can see a lot more fine hair root development, as well as a lot more root mass. So we took this to our innovation farm. We're on our 3rd year now. Timac Agro has, we have 7 replicated research farms throughout the US where we can actually study the effects of this. So this one is on a Lancaster County soil, relatively high natural phosphorus, but phosphoruses are really common in starter wheat fertility, even if we already have a relatively strong presence. So what we showed here is kind of a grower standard. And then we did top phos pound for pound. So we basically matched the actual pounds of material. The top phos we were using was a 0.230. So it only had phosphorus in it. And we were comparing it to a standard DAP, which is a 1646. So again, we had to kind of adjust our rate on that pound for pound unit for unit application there. And so when we went pound for pound, we were actually using half of the actual pounds of phosphorus per acre, but it was the same amount of material being applied. When you go unit for unit, you have to put almost double the top phos you put as a standard top phosphorus because the analysis is lower, right? And what we saw there is top phos pound for pound worked, I mean, slightly better, if not the same as the unit for unit application. So we were getting the same level of phosphorus efficiency, and especially in areas like we are, where our soil phosphoruses are pretty good already. So we're not at risk of depleting the soil. If you can get away with using a little bit less with similar results, then that's a win for everybody. Lastly, on soybean yield, we did a number of trials comparing MAP and DAP to top phos. Most of these were pound for pound, so it was actually half the units of phosphorus that were applied to this. And we saw an average increase across these trials of 6 bushels per acre, or roughly in some cases a little over 10% yield bump. So we were actually applying less and getting more out of our phosphorus investment with this. Don't have quite as strong of a data set on this one because we don't move quite as much. And so I think I'm going to conclude with that. And again, Matt, thank you so much for your time, and I'll take questions.
Great, thanks a lot, Alex. It looks like there were just 2 questions that we can get to here. Olga, if you want to share your screen with the questions, that's fine. And the only thing is you may have to jump back a couple slides if we need to look at some data here, Olga. So Ed Weinberg asked for phosphorus and soil measurements and each of the test results displayed, and I'm not can't remember which slide this was actually. Was a P soil index used? So Malik 3 Bray consistently from test site to test site, or from site and test to site and test, he says, or was another method of measurement used across all of these tests?
Yeah, so that's we did everything through Spectrum, which is Malik 3. And yes, we tried to keep our indexes similar throughout our testing. So even if we use different labs, we tried to keep at least the same base. We tried to make sure they were at least doing the same measurement there.
Okay, great.
We have actually also, I mean, just to note, we've been dabbling in using Haney tests and simple like citric acid extractions as well. I didn't put any of the results in that because they're a little preliminary at the moment, but in the last year or two, we've actually done some work around that and measuring the differences between how we, and I could talk about this for an hour if you want, but how these newer measurements on phosphorus availability can quantify things a little bit differently than we're used to with, say, a Malik 3.
Okay, great. Then we have another one here in your Lancaster County study. What was the no P applied yield?
We didn't run a no P. We were actually just comparing it to a grower standard starter program on that study. So we didn't do a no P baseline on that one.
Okay.
Probably could have in hindsight. It's a good point.
Right. So when you talk about yield comparisons, do you also have a financial comparison, the value of increased yield plus reduced phosphorus cost?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. In a lot of cases, especially when we're going pound for pound, our program would probably be a touch more expensive. If you were to run on the unit for unit side of that equation, I'm not sure you would get a stable ROI off of that based on the work we've done, just because we don't see a huge difference between, you know, basically applying double the material. there. So yes, I have all that cost analysis information if you would like to see it, but generally, pound for pound will ROI, unit for unit usually doesn't, just because of how much more material we need to apply.
Okay, great. And then the last question here, do your products spur or enhance seed germination?
That's a good question. When we did the wheat studies and the soybean studies, we mainly looked at wheat specifically. We looked at tillering, and we did see some increases in tillering on those top 5 sites specifically. Like in the spring at Green Up, you could definitely see it. But wheat is hard to measure on a seed germination standpoint. So we didn't actually conduct that piece of it. Generally, though, Timac Agro products, we have other products that are specifically designed to spur and enhance germination. Yes.
Great. We had another one come in here, Alex, but I'm going to move on to the next presentation just to make sure we have enough time. If you wouldn't mind going to the Q&A and answering that via text, I appreciate it.
Yep, no problem.
Great.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So our next presentation, our last presentation for today, is from Dr. Kweda Chin. He's the Chief Sciences Officer at Verdesian Life Sciences.
So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Like Matt said, my name is Kweda Chin, and I'm the Chief Science Officer for Verdesian Life Sciences. For those of you who don't know Verdesian Life Sciences, Verdesian is a manufacturer of nutrient use efficiency products, which include like fertilizer additives, like the one that I'm going to share with you on phosphorus fertilizer enhancers, along with the biostimulants, biofertilizers, biologicals, and micronutrients. So the company produces about 200 products, and we sell to over 40 countries. So for today, Matt and the Sustainable Phosphorus Alliance really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much for us to be able to share with the audience about our phosphorus fertilizer line of products, particularly for today for Avail and Avail T5. So what I'm going to share is like what those products are and how do they work, and how do we recommend the customers to use the products. So I'm going to start with the agronomic challenges that we're facing. But I mean, like the previous presenters has shared plenty of information about the background on phosphorus impact to the environment and the challenges that we're facing on both the agronomy and the environmental side. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I'm going to spend a lot more time to explain the Avail and Avail T5, what they are, how do they work. So just to add a small, a couple of slides of different data points, just look at it from the agronomy point of view to add on to the challenge that we're facing from the previous presenters. And if you look at the soil itself as a whole, and majority of the time you will see, depending on the region and depending on the soil type, we have abundant of P as an element in the soil. But the issue is like the soluble phosphorus, which are the ones that are available to the plant to uptake and fuel the plant growth. Those are only a small part of the phosphorus in soil. It's only like 1 to 2 pounds within like 1 AFS, 1 acre furrow slice. 1 AFS is about 2 million pounds of soil, and then you can do the calculation there. It's a very small amount. Then what we do, so to be able to supply sufficient amount of phosphorus for the plant growth, and so we obviously the easiest way to do it is like we apply fertilizers. But there's another issue. We apply fertilizers typically based on human schedule, and we apply either right after harvesting or before planting. So there, when the time reaches for the, using corn as an example, for the plant reaches the higher demand at V6 stage or later, by that time, the phosphorus fertilizer that we put on the ground has been sitting there for months. So there are plenty of time for the phosphorus fertilizers to be either fixed or lost in other ways like surface erosion, runoff. So there's only, like, depending on who you ask, there's only about 25% of applied fertilizer, phosphate fertilizers to be utilized by the crop. So then, like, the problem itself is not new, and people have been, like the Sustainable Phosphorus Alliance, along with the other researchers and growers, they have been working on develop solutions to solve this challenge for decades, if not hundreds of years. But one of the solutions that I want to share with you today is our technology, Avail and Avail T5. So what is Avail? Avail and Avail T5, Avail is the previous generation, and Avail T5 is the newer generation that are offered by us, Verdesian. I'll start with what is Avail. From the chemistry point of view, Avail itself is a copolymer of maleic acid and itaconic acid. You look at the structure, this is not a complex chemistry. You combine those double bonds together, you create a repeating unit for a copolymer. And the way that we design this polymer, there are a few considerations. So itaconic acid is coming from a cornstarch that goes through a fermentation process, and then we take the fermentation metabolite, itaconic acid, and then we use that as a monomer to synthesize the polymer. But the issue with the itaconic acid is it biodegrades pretty quickly in the soil. So we add a piece, as in this case, like a maleic acid, to create the copolymer so we can control the biodegradability. But the other reason that we choose those two acid functional groups is because out of the ones that we tried, those two has the highest charge density, which transfers to a higher CEC. With a calculated CEC is about 1800 milliequivalent per 100 gram. And but I mean, like, it's not just that; it's the molecular weight design, and we don't want the molecular weight to be too high. And one of the reasons is the viscosity and handling of the product. So we want to keep it in a low thousands range of the molecular weight. And the other one is the biodegradability. So with that, this is the consideration that goes into the Avail copolymer design. And that's the first generation of Avail that we have patented and created. And then, like, later on, after Avail was launched over a decade ago, and then Avail T, and then about 5 years ago, we launched Avail T5, and the difference is we added the sulfonate functional groups to the copolymer itself. The reason we want to add that is to create a stronger charge to the polymer, so that to bring in more consistent performance of the product across a wider range of soil pH. So with that, we have the deliverables that we saw in the field. We have the enhanced consistency and performance, and I'll show you, like, what's the mode of action. How does it reduce the fixation of phosphorus, and from the handling of the product point of view, it also reduces the buildup on equipment. So both products are applied as a surface coating to bulk fertilizers, either MAP or DAP. So with that, and then like how does this chemistry work? There's a lot on this slide, but the main mode of action is the interaction with the positive ions in the soil. Just like Chuck and Alex mentioned, I mean, those positively charged ions, they tend to form precipitates with phosphate, and then that's how the fixation works to the phosphorus fertilizer that we used, so that you lose the availability to the crop. And then like how does it really work in a microscope, in a micro, like a soil chemistry point of view? So Dr. Hastenberg from NC State, and he did a study on this, and with a model system, as we all probably know, the polycrystalline, whether it's iron and aluminum oxides, those are considered dominant sorbents for phosphate that applied to the soil. So in the model system, in order to screen out all the other factors that may impact this study, the goal of the study is to study the mode of action of a alveolar copolymer to see how it works to reduce the fixation of phosphate fertilizers. So he used the iron and aluminum oxide as a model system. What I'm showing here is just the ferrihydrite, which is the iron oxide curve that are shown on this picture. The x-axis are the added amount of veil, and to see, look at the dose response. And the y-axis here is the percent of added P that are detected in solution. So those are the soluble P. So those are three lines, dotted lines. Those are the amount of P that's added based on the percentage of maximum absorption capability of the iron and aluminum oxide that's being used. So with that, you can see a very clear dose response when you add more veil to the system. And by the way, I have the reference that's listed on the slides. If you're interested, feel free to grab those articles and read the details. But just using like the gray one, dotted line as example, if we start without adding our veil, the soluble P is about like a 1 to 2%. But by adding our veil to it, let's say we add 100% of the maximum absorption capability. So that reaches to roughly about 13%. So that's a huge increase in terms of providing more availability to the phosphate, so that can be intercepted by the crop and utilized. And to the reason he did, there's like a different percentage of phosphate to be added to the system. And as you can imagine, like let's see this the dot that where my cursor is, that's where the phosphate fertilizer being used. And that could reach the maximum absorption capability of the soil particle, right? By adding a veil to it, you can solubilize more, or like provide a more soluble P, and so that effectively expands the circle, and that the root becomes more, that the phosphate becomes more accessible to the root at various growth stages. So that's the chemistry and the mode of action, and how this the avail and availtify works. From a general description point of view, in his paper, which again, like you can pull out the details. And there are two mode of actions. One is the competitive absorption between the carboxyl group on the copolymer and phosphate for the soil surfaces, and the competitive absorption. The other one is a complex matrix solution dissolution. So what that means is like it could release or like solubilize some of the absorbed phosphates by particularly the labile phosphates that are already absorbed onto the soil surface and make it become soluble, so become available to the plants. So that's from the modeling system, from the lab point of view. But I mean, how does the product perform in the field? This is again the piano chart, just like Alex showed, and we did. This is only on corn only. We did 317 trials before we launched the product. Those are mainly small plot replicate trials through universities and independent CROs with a small number of large scale on-farm trials. And as you can see here, we have over 90% win rate with this product. And with the average yield gain is about 8 bushels per acre. With 90% win rate for this kind of product is already pretty high. And the Avail and Avail T5 is currently being used since the product launch for more than 100 million acres. And Alex said, I mean, the 90% win rate is pretty high, but we didn't stop here. And we want to understand how and what are the characteristics and how this 90% it converts to a more consistent results that can also consistency to bring economic benefits to our customers. And fortunately, at that time, so Professor Hopkins from BYU, he did a meta-analysis out of 503 field trials. Those are publicly available in the literatures. And that's not only for corn, this is for across all crops. Just try to say like, well, how does the Avail perform in the field? So his conclusion was, through this meta-analysis, you have an increase, yield increase is about 2.1% across all data that he collected. But I mean, like that, it is statistically significant, but 2.1% is like, well, I mean, that number does seem to be pretty low. But if you take into consideration of the trials with the conditions that showed a phosphate response, so those are like the low soil test P soils and non-optimal pH ranges, and also like a lower phosphorus rate being used. And across all that, the increase is about 4.6%. And he also noticed there are a number of those trials that were published were not actually like a P response soils. So what that means is that so under the conditions where increased phosphorus availability does not influence any yield or like a crop quality, you will not likely get a response on the products that are designed to enhance phosphorus use efficiency. So the number, that 4.6%, and the conditions that he laid out that help us to design a product guideline to our customers. And this is the one we're using, and you can pull out all the information from our internet that I posted on the bottom of the slide. And the way that we guide customers is essentially when and how to use Avail and Avail T5. So there are two critical measurements. One is the soil test P levels, and the other one is the soil pH ranges. And those numbers designated how likely you're going to get a good return on investment to the product. So that correlates to the meta-analysis Professor Hopkins did on all the data that he collected. So with that, the product has been used not only and I showed a lot of data on corn, but the product has been used on a variety of crops. It's not just corn. Just since the picture is worth 1,000 words, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures on both on corn and on soy, and then you know what to look for during the growing season when you apply a BAO and a BAO T5 with your phosphate fertilizers. So the main takeaways from the information that I shared. So BAO and a BAO T5 is a patent protected technology. The technology has been proven both scientifically and in the field practices on a variety of crops for over a decade. As in all the previous presenters and the winners through the EEF challenge, and we're constantly working on to providing more tools to the toolbox to improve phosphate use efficiency and to reduce environmental impacts of the fertilizer use. But a BAO is one of these good options for everyone to look into if you are in the space of looking for a phosphorus fertilizer enhancer. So with that, Matt, I'm gonna turn over back to you.
Yeah, great, Queta. Thanks so much for that presentation. We've got just a couple minutes for questions here. We may not get to all of them, but we've had a bunch come in. And so I'm going to start with an easy one for you, Queta, which is available in Latin America and Venezuela specifically?
Yes, it is.
Great.
So yeah, if you go on our website, that will tell you who to contact, and so you will have all the information there.
Okay, great.
Yep.
The next one here is, so if available products tie up known phosphorus binders, so counter ions like calcium and iron, that are also secondary nutrients, can the application create deficiencies in some of those nutrients?
Yeah, so in this case, it's the study that we did is quite the opposite, because the way that a BAO, so if you go back to think about the structure that I showed, the carboxylic acid functional groups, so it's acting as a complexing agent. It's not a strong tie-up to those metal ions, which are secondary nutrients to crops. So those will become available to the crop as well.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Next one is, how long will Avail remain active in the soil, interacting with positive ions, and have you seen deficiencies in nutrients with positive charges? Kind of similar.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like as I mentioned, because it's a itaconic maleic copolymer. Itaconic itself, if you just do a polymer of polyitaconic, it won't last long. So the half-life is about 28 days. But by adding maleic to it, so far for the biodegradability that we have done on the molecule itself, it lasts more than the growing season.
Great. Next one here is, when you've had negative yield performance, did you investigate those outliers for what might have caused them?
Right. So unfortunately, I don't have too much of detail on the negative ones. And maybe that's one thing that we can go back and look into, but we're focusing on how to guide the customers using the positive response conditions.
Okay, great. And the last one we're going to have time for here is, can you elaborate what you mean by a low P rate in your chart? Is that less than the rate prescribed by a nutrient management plan, or where is that cut off? Yeah, so there is actually a chart on our website that so depending on the low rate, so the short answer is depending on which
what soil types you want to use and which measurement you want to use, right? Whether it's a Bray P or Austin or Malik. So there is a range recommendation on our website in terms of a low and high across different ranges.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Queta, for that. And really, I'd like to thank all of our presenters for the time they took putting these presentations together and delivering them today. I think this is a great challenge, and I'm glad to see that this work is moving forward. I want to, again, and I want to thank the audience too. We had a lot of great questions. I want to again invite everyone to our Phosphorus Forum. If you like talks like these, that'll be happening in February in the Phoenix area, February 21st to 22nd. We'll have a registration site up in the next month or two here. And you can follow that action via our newsletter or social media to find out when that comes live. Go to our website at phosphorusalliance.org if you want to find out how to access some of these resources like our social media and our newsletter. And with that, thanks to everyone for coming. We try to do these quarterly, so I hope you can make it out for the next one. And thanks again. Goodbye.